Welcome everyone to this session in the European Commission's Research and Innovation Days conference dedicated to leading the race for clean energy. My name is Patrick Child. I am Deputy Director General in DG Research and Innovation in the European Commission, and I'm happy to be moderating our session today. And in our session, we're going to address three blocks of issues. Firstly, the central importance of clean energy research and innovation for the European Green Deal objectives, this flagship project of the European Union to become the first carbon neutral continent by 2050, where in the energy space, the European Commission has presented a number of very important initiatives, and we'll go into that. Secondly, I want to address the international dimension, the importance of global engagement around clean energy research and innovation if we are to achieve our climate and sustainability objectives more generally. And thirdly, looking at how we organize ourselves in the European Union on discussions between member states, with the industry, with the research community, to gather up some ideas, if we can, about the future direction of the Strategic Energy Technologies Plan, the SET plan. And to help me discuss these issues, I'm very happy to have three very, very well qualified colleagues in the panel today. And I'd like to start by introducing them briefly. So firstly, we have Madame Valérie Bouillon-Delporte, who is Market Opportunities Assessment Director and Incubator Program Officer at Michelin. And until just a couple of days ago, was also the chair of our industrial partnership on hydrogen fuel cells and joint undertaking, and president of Hydrogen Europe. Secondly, we have Professor Nebojša Nakičenčović, who we will call Naki for the rest of this session, because it's easier, certainly for me. He is Deputy Chair of the group of the Chief Scientific Advisors who advise the European Commission on important science evidence for policymaking, and has been leading work just recently on a forthcoming opinion on a systemic approach to the energy transition in Europe. And so while, of course, we won't be able to anticipate the results of this, I'm sure, very stimulating opinion, his expertise and knowledge in the area, particularly also as a leading European scientist in support of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, brings, I think, great scientific authority to our reflections. And our third panelist is Mr. Wilfried Kraus, who is Deputy Director General for European Cooperation at the Ministry of Education and Research in Germany, and has particularly been involved during the German presidency of the second half of last year in spearheading initiatives as part of our renewed strategy for the European research area, particularly around the topic of hydrogen. So panel members, you are extremely welcome to be with us today. Before we start plunging into our questions, I just want to remind the people watching that you have an opportunity to feed in your questions using Slido and the chat function of this session, and that we will then, I hope at the end of our 3 rounds of discussion, have an opportunity to address some of your questions as well. So I'd like to kick off, though, with a first block of questions to each of our panelists around the important contribution of clean energy research and innovation in the European Green Deal. And as I mentioned in my initial words, the energy transition is at the absolute heart of what we're trying to achieve in the European Green Deal, and has led, therefore, to the European Commission recently adopting a number of important strategies covering hydrogen, covering heating and cooling in buildings, offshore energy and wind in particular, as well as sector integration and a range of other topics. And in the coming days, we will be coming forward with an important package of legislation, which we call Fit for 55, which will help us not only on the way to the net zero by 2050, but also to achieve the intermediate target of a 55% reduction in emissions, we hope, by 2030. And so just to open up this discussion, I'd like to ask you, Neki, first, just to set the scene a little bit. I mean, the Green Deal and our new strategies have some very, very ambitious objectives. And I'd just like you to sort of trace the landscape, if you can, of what you think we need to be doing both at European and national level in order to accelerate the clean energy transition and stimulate the necessary investment, both public and private, in order to achieve what we need to do. Naki, please.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be on this important panel. Let me first say, as Patrick has mentioned, that we are now in the middle of working on the systemic approach to the energy transition in Europe. That consists of two reports. The first report is an evidence review report. It's a kind of a scientific assessment of the state of the knowledge by SAPEA. This is the science advice for policy by the European Academies Consortium. And the second one is the scientific opinion with recommendations on the way forward by the 7 chief scientific advisors. So it's actually 2 reports. They'll be handed over to Commissioner Gabriel on the 29th, and you will be able to download all of them in the evening. So it is premature, as Patrick said, that I present the results and the findings. I might, if I have time later on, say a few things about the content, but let me just start with the personal views of answering the question, how Europe could lead the clean race. And I would like to make 3 major highlights of what needs to be done in order, over the next 30 years, in order to achieve the European Green Deal, and as Patrick mentioned, also importantly, the Fit for 55. So the first priority, in my view, would be complete decarbonization of Europe by the middle of the century. This means substitution of fossil energy by zero carbon and zero greenhouse gas sources. It would also mean decarbonization of fossil energy. Now, the co-benefits would be great, in my view. Number 1, elimination of air pollution associated with fossil energy, and that's most of the air pollution. The second one would be the reduction of fossil energy fuel imports, and this is one of the current greatest dependencies that Europe has. Number 2 priority, in my view, is pervasive improvement of efficiencies through electrification and introduction of hydrogen. Initially, that could be the blue hydrogen and eventually then also green hydrogen. This will require new infrastructures and systems. So in other words, it will require new high upfront investments. Now, my hope is that those investments will go down through learning by doing, to research and innovation, very important, and also importantly, through large-scale deployment of these technologies. But the benefit would be much lower cost in the future as well, because the fuel costs will not be necessary anymore. Let me also observe that I think that the trillions that have been pledged for the recovery from the tragic COVID-19 pandemic could be also used for building this clean, secure, sustainable, and affordable energy systems of the future. The last comment I would like to make about the priorities, I think, is the fundamental change of energy end use and services through digitalization and electrification. These are very pervasive developments, and the convergence of digital technologies could bring with it new activities, maybe even more revolutionary than the change in lifestyles and energy services we had through smartphones and internet. There are many new developments, such as a shift from ownership to usership, sharing services, shared economy, and also, for example, time of use pricing systems. Let me conclude by making just mentioning one vivid example that we all know about the efficiency revolution, and that is the electric car. An electric car is roughly an equivalent of 1.1 liter per 100 equivalent of a gasoline vehicle, at most 1.5 liters per 100. That means a 3-fold reduction in energy needs and essentially zero emissions at the vehicle. So this is, I think, a great indication of the power of electrification and digitalization. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Naki, and thanks for setting the scene so comprehensively. And we obviously very much look forward to the opinion that the group of scientific advisors and the associated report of the academies in a couple of days' time. I'd like to move on now to Wilfried, if I may, and focus perhaps a little bit more on hydrogen, because of course we've just seen that the German government has recently announced very significant investments of something in the order of 8 billion euros in hydrogen projects, particularly linked to the steel industry. And I think it would be interesting to us to hear how this industry vendor is intended to be developed and how it relates to the broader energy vendor in Germany, and perhaps also the link with the European discussion as well. But Wilfried.
Patrick, thank you very much. Dear panelists, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to get this, have gotten this invitation. Indeed, hydrogen is a big issue in Germany, in particular in our government, not only in our ministry, and therefore Germany adopted the National Hydrogen Strategy in June 2020. And as a consequence, we will invest more than 9 billion euro in building up a sustainable hydrogen economy. 7 million will be spent for national projects, but, and this is an interesting aspect because it's a global problem, we will spend 2 billion euro for international cooperation, and I will come back later. 2.5 billion, and this is another aspect than the aspects which were mentioned by Benaki. 2.5 billion euro will be spent for projects in converting steel and chemical industry to hydrogen-based processes. We focus on areas which are hard to decarbonize by using renewable electricity directly. First and foremost, industry and transport. Regarding your question, the transformation of the energy system, our energy vendor is as well an industry vendor. You mentioned it in your question. And it would be impossible without a transformation of this industry at the same time, vice versa. To put it simple, to reach our climate targets, we need to rebuild our core industry towards renewables and sustainability, in particular, those with a large CO2 footprint, such as steel and chemistry. Just to give you an idea, in Germany, the industry accounts for nearly 1/3 of the final energy consumption. Most of the energy is produced by using fossil fuels, for example, coke in steel making or natural gas in the chemical sector. That means climate action directly affects the competitiveness of these industries in Europe. As a result, carbon leakage is a challenge, and it's a challenge not only for climate protection itself, but also for the industrial strength of Germany and in particular Europe. If these industries disappear, the future of much larger value chains in Europe is also in question. Therefore, we need to find ways to decarbonize our core industry while maintaining and strengthening their global competitiveness. Switching industry towards green hydrogen will be very challenging. Many companies must completely rethink, reinvent, and then rebuild their process chains. This endeavor takes years or decades and a lot of money. One positive example in this context is Carbon to Chem, a project with 16 partners from academia and industry aims at curbing the CO2 footprint of the steel production by converting steel mill gases into base products for the chemical industry by using green hydrogen. Just 2 years after the kickoff in 2016, the project successfully demonstrates the whole process under real-world conditions for ammonia and methanol for the first time ever. The demonstration lab, which is located, and this is as well an interesting aspect, is directed at a steel mill in Duisburg, has become a center point for cross-industrial and scientific collaboration. Currently, the project team is already aiming at a large industrial scale demonstrator. This is an astonishing pace for such a groundbreaking technology. And let me finish with this point. Other countries are much more successful in turning ideas into opportunities and thriving business models. We must achieve this when it comes to clean energy and to the Green Deal too. World-leading innovation do not only, and this is an additional aspect we have to keep in mind, we have not only to look on the technical aspects. World-leading innovations do not only stem from technological breakthroughs, they require the right conditions too. In particular, when it comes to green industry, we need a regulatory framework that enables forward-looking business models and makes green hydrogen competitive. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Wilfried, and I absolutely agree with you that the direction of travel in our discussions on hydrogen towards its application directly in heavy industry and the hard-to-abate sectors is something which is very, very important. But of course it brings new challenges, and I'd like to turn that challenge immediately to a question for Valérie, given your unique insights into the sort of industry perspective on hydrogen from your recent leadership in this area. What do you think we need to do in order to achieve the very ambitious objectives that the European Union has set itself? Something like 40 gigawatts of hydrogen production by 2030 and a widespread development of hydrogen values. From an industry perspective, what do we need to do to achieve these objectives?
Thank you, Patrick, for giving us the opportunity. As you know, both the industry pillars and the research pillars within the hydrogen undertaking are mobilized in order to make it happen, because reaching 40 gigawatt of electrolyzer production capacity by 2030 is really challenging. There are many ways in order to secure this, the way to reach these ambitious targets, and I would like to share a few of them with you today. So first, we need to scale up electrolyzer project, and we need a robust framework in place with incentives to boost the uptake of renewable hydrogen. There is a very big potential for the development of Hydrogen Valley, which is a concept that was initiated within our GU in 2018, and to do this in industrial areas and specifically in port and around port. There is a lot of European ports where you can find energy-intensive industry. Rotterdam is top of mind, but there are many others in Europe. This proximity to demand is key for providing economies of scale for prospective hydrogen producers. And then you have the upcoming revision of the RED II, and we do believe the European Commission should consider including quotas for renewable hydrogen consumption in industry. This will trigger the appropriate investment, sending clear signals to investors. And we need investors because moving to this capacity will be costly. In terms of planning, hydrogen stakeholders must be included as well in network development planning. Overall, the way that 10-year network development planning is governed under the 10-year regulation needs to evolve, in our opinion. Hydrogen players should be included. We could also benefit from the development of dedicated regional hydrogen group and hydrogen outlooks. And this group could incentivize planning at a more local and regional level, promoting regional cooperation. This will encourage member states to work towards the development and the rollout of common hydrogen infrastructure, which will then become part of the future internal energy market and energy system of the futures. We are currently lacking the foresight on where hydrogen projects are being planned and where the demand is, and we need to connect both. We need this outlook to help inform the governance process and create more transparency. Last, we also need to remove barriers to renewable hydrogen development. At present, there is a lot of uncertainty regarding the implementation of a delegated act of RED II on Article 27, and I'm speaking about additionality and to a lesser extent geographic and temporal correlation. To be clear, do not misunderstand me. We are absolutely 100% supportive of the principle of additionality, but we need more renewable in the system. The development of renewable hydrogen is dependent on this. It is a sine qua non. What we are concerning with is the stringent criteria being proposed, which we have seen in leaked version of a delegated act, and we need workable criteria. Otherwise, there is no way we can achieve the 2024 6 gigawatt objective, and even more, it will be far to achieve the 40 gigawatt objective by 2030. So we propose that the European Commission consider exempting renewable fuels of non-biological origin producers from proving additionality until 2025. And in 2025, Commission and relevant stakeholders should assess progress towards meeting the 2024 6 gigawatt objective and 2030 40 gigawatt target. Member states also should bear responsibility for providing additional renewable electricity capacity by setting dedicated renewable targets to be used for renewable production. And then renewable producers should be allowed to produce renewable hydrogen from curtailed renewable electricity, and then accept guarantees of origin alongside PPA, power purchase agreement, to prove the renewable character of the electricity being used in the production of hydrogen. With all of that, we could be very confident that the target of 40 gigawatt of electrolysis by 2030 could be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. You've been extremely clear and given us a lot to think about, and certainly we'd take on board many of your reflections as we take the discussion forward now. I'd like now to move on to my second sort of broad set of topics, which is about our international role. It comes back a bit to something that Wilfred was saying about the challenge that we in Europe face in meeting global competition, sometimes in being dependent on raw materials from less sort of stable parts of the world. And yet we do have, and this is good news, in the clean energy sector, I would say, a well-established global lead. And so, Naki, I'd like to ask you whether you agree with this analysis and what you think we need to do in order to maintain our leading position internationally.
Well, thank you for that question. I, of course, completely agree with that. I think it's a must for Europe to maintain its lead, for example, on decarbonization, clean, flexible, and affordable energy in the future. And I would argue also that the international scene has changed. It's a huge new opportunity for Europe. At the recent G7 meeting, there were new commitments for climate neutrality. President Biden's summit in April during the Earth Day also showed many countries that have aspirations to achieve carbon neutrality. For example, China by 2060, that's really significant. The US, that's also new with Biden's administration, Russia, Japan, and many other countries by 2050. So I would argue that potentially the club of carbon neutrality is growing in the future. But that's also brings some challenges I think Europe needs to face. For example, there might be a need for the border tax adjustment, and that's related to the leakage that Wilfred mentioned. Namely, we need to protect ourselves from goods and services that are not climate neutral and that are not environmentally friendly, of course, in accordance to WTO regulations. But I think the good news is that the growing club of countries striving for climate neutrality would give Europe a unique opportunity, I think, to create or help create carbon-free trading zones, encompassing major emitters and a growing number of countries. So this is an opportunity to nudge the world in the right direction, so to say. Now, another point I would like to raise is that would create tax proceeds from the border adjustment, but there would be also proceeds from auctioning of the tradable permits. And in my view, one needs to consider how to, with those funds, vigorously support research and innovation, as this is the future in Europe, but also the German example on hydrogen also in the world. I would like to mention another important dimension of that, and namely not to leave anybody behind. Some of these funds could be used to support the 30 million or so people in Europe who right now cannot afford to heat their homes. And in the world, it's even more drastic. 3 billion people do not have access to clean cooking, and almost 1 billion don't have access to electricity. So I would say this is a huge opportunity for European leadership, but there is also, I think, a challenge in the international context. We might replace dependence of fossil fuel by dependence on other materials, such as rare earths. I think this is a huge challenge, but the answer is also in the Green Deal, namely transition towards circular economy, to reduce the waste and increase recovery of materials, and not just for the imported goods, but also materials such as plastic, metals, and so on. So let me just conclude my brief comment on this topic, that the clean, flexible, and affordable energy services would be important in the future, just like they have been important in the human development since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I think this is a backbone of human progress, and I think internationally very important to maintain the lead in this, what one could call next revolution, that could be characterized as green and digital, but I hope also as efficient and sufficient.
Thank you very much indeed. And I agree with everything you've said, really. And in particular, I think that your emphasis on being attentive to the uneven distribution of the impacts of our clean energy transition, of our climate ambitions more generally, and the logic that lay behind, for example, the Commission's initiative on the just transition mechanism, which was one of the first things that we did under the Green Deal, is very important. But I'd like to come now to Wilfried again, if I may. Now, Germany is, of course, a very active member of a number of international gatherings and institutions committed to cooperation on clean energy research and innovation. I'm thinking of things like Mission Innovation, the Clean Energy Ministerial, the International Energy Agency in Paris, as well as the work in the G7 and the G20. I mean, just be interested to hear what your feelings, experiences are of this sort of international debate on clean energy innovation, and which of these organizations, produces the most in terms of results, and what can we do to further exploit the opportunities of international engagement that they present?
Thank you, Patrick. It's clear the climate change is a global challenge. We need global and international organizations and platforms in order to cooperate in a better and an efficient way. But in our opinion, these platforms as such, as a on a strategic level, will only solve a part of the problem, but not the problem in total. We need concrete actions. We need concrete cooperations with other countries and other parts of the world. And to pick up some arguments which were raised in the last minutes, we know in Germany that we only will be able to, for example, produce 50 to 60% of our energy with renewables. And we will be forced, and we will not have an alternative not to import again and again energy. And therefore, we need partners in the world which will be able to, and this is the most important thing, to import green energy to Europe and Germany, because it will not solve the global problem if we will be clean, but the rest of the world will not be clean. And therefore, in general, it's not enough, and this is the conclusion, it's not enough to form platforms, to talk about the things, what we want to do. We need concrete engagement, actions, commitment. Large fora are often cumbersome and dominated by a very granular yet fundamental discussions about very specific policies or technologies. This isn't helpful to facilitate RNA cooperation. What we need are coalitions of the willing. My experience in international cooperation in the last 30 years has taught me one thing. If you really want to join forces with other countries, just ask and come up with some constructive ideas. Usually you are met with open ears. And I will give you some examples. This is now how the German and Australian government set up a plan within months for a joint technology and innovation incubator called Highgate within weeks and months. We are talking about 80 million euros of joint funding. That was easy to do so. A second good example is the cooperation with WASCAL and ZASCAL. These are climate service centers for West Africa and Southern Africa, which were supported in the last 10 years with more than 100 million euro from my ministry. They have become, for us, a driver for joint energy research. Why? Because we left the stage of political talk behind us. We are working closely together on concrete projects and have built a direct link not only between the scientific community in Africa and Germany, but also between policymakers on both sides. And this is really astonishing. Just to give you an idea, last year the BMBF initiated a research-driven process to explore the potential of hydrogen production from the renewable energy sources within 31 African states. Due to the close cooperation in WASCAL and ZASCAL, we were not only able to bring in ECOWAS and SADC, the economic organizations in the western and southern part of Africa, but also, and this is the important point, to mobilize technical teams supported by the local government in each country. Therefore, we have an atlas of hydrogen potential in West Africa. We published in May the first results, and end of the year we will have more, and all these results will be accessible for all of you on our homepages. This hands-on mentality of cooperation we also need on the European level. The funding with Horizon Europe is clearly good, but we also need a truly European spirit. We need to create a European research community for clean energy innovation. We have to harvest all the potential, bringing together stakeholders from research, industry, and civil society, which show commitment and take ownership, leading to more engagement, more players, and in particular, more money on the table. One way to do so is the ERA pilot initiative on R&I for green hydrogen, which I will explain later on more in detail. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much indeed. And I certainly agree strongly with what you said, that we don't necessarily need heavy institutional structures, but rather a shared willingness and enthusiasm to do things together swiftly and in a pragmatic, results-oriented sort of way. So thank you for that comment. And it sort of gives me a natural transition to perhaps put the question to Valérie about the recently launched Mission Innovation headline goal mission around clean hydrogen, where at the ministerial meeting attended by Executive Vice President Timmermans and our Commissioner Maria Gabriel and many other world leaders a couple of weeks ago, for its next sort of 5-year chapter, and also with help, by the way, from Germany in the preparatory phase, we launched this mission on hydrogen. And I'd be interested to know, Valérie, how you see that and what you think we would need to contribute from a European perspective to the success of this global initiative.
As you stated, Patrick, this global initiative is key. And just a quick reminder for the audience, Mission Innovation is a very ambitious program which was created following Paris Agreement during COP21 a couple of years ago. And the aim of Mission Innovation is to increase funding for our R&D activities that will contribute to our ambitious climate targets. On Hydrogen Europe research and Hydrogen Europe industry, we are delighted that hydrogen is now fully recognized. And I must admit, it was not the case so long ago. So now we need to continue these efforts. And several initiatives are being launched to address hydrogen, and seeing hydrogen as having a pivotal role today to reach our target is something that we welcome very much. So taking these points into account, and in order to make this global mission a success, we have a few recommendations I would like to share with you today. The first one is we need to focus on aligning between initiatives that already exist. The joint undertaking, the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. A board alignment is needed, and this is where the mission will bring impact in our view. The second one is to encourage cooperation across the board in all directions, from research and innovation to industrial deployment, from national to supranational levels. Do not work in silo. Then the last one is to carry on with the efforts already made. And the joint undertaking we have on hydrogen is very well placed for this role. And you mentioned the launch of Mission Innovation. I would like to mention the dedicated website called Mission Innovation Hydrogen Valley Platform, which was also recently published, and it shows how successful the initiative can be.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Valérie. And I think that does give a sense of the sort of scale of the challenge that we face in our international engagements, but also the vital importance of making real operational progress towards our shared objectives, but also the opportunities for the European Union and European actors to continue and build on their established leadership in this important area. We are running through our time more quickly than I had hoped or expected, but I do want to spend the last 10 minutes or so of our session discussing how we work together at a European level. I mean, I think Wilfried very nicely kicked off the discussion a moment ago when he was talking about how we can perhaps take advantage of the new opportunities under the European research area. This was a communication that was presented by the Commission during the German presidency at the end of last year, and where the specific example of clean energy and hydrogen was highlighted. We also, under our new program, Horizon Europe, the new research and innovation framework program, are launching a new clean energy partnership. And what I'd be interested to hear from all of our panelists, perhaps starting with you, Wilfried, is indeed how can we maybe adapt or improve or remodel our existing strategic energy plan platforms of collaboration in order to make them more relevant for our Green Deal agenda and more effective in terms of our objectives for the clean energy transition. So Wilfried, please.
Yes, thank you. I think it's not a question which can be answered easily. We experienced during the revitalization of the era, we had this discussion during our council presidency very intensively, that we need more personal commitment and actions and more coordination and more efficiency. And Valerie mentioned that we have to bring all, in particular in the hydrogen sector, have to bring the existing initiatives together to better coordinate them, to have a common approach and a common strategy. Lessons learned is cooperation accelerates research and innovation, but it is more needed than technology-driven solutions alone, and therefore clean energy transition partnerships, the CETPs, will take the idea of transnational cooperation one step further by breaking the silos that was mentioned before as well, of the different technology areas through integrating the different technology areas in one co-funded partnership. This is a very important step forward. Beyond this integration, CTP will reach out to other partnerships for the cooperation where it supports the green energy technologies. And last but not least, AeroNet projects under the SET plan built successfully a basis for transnational cooperation in the EU and partly also beyond. One good example for the latter is the co-fund partnership on clean energy transition LEAP-RE. LEAP-RE aims at developing a long-term Europe-Africa partnership on research and innovation. And this was the starting point, our ERA pilot initiative on green hydrogen, which was decided in July last year, is research-driven but open for everyone and fully transparent. The initiative is based on the principle of variable geometry so that every member state can participate voluntarily at any time, and because it's flexible, we can adapt by trial and error. And this is an important point, and member states don't feel obliged to take part, only if they see an advantage. And in our agenda process, running process, we have more than 19 interested and engaged member states. This is in particular for me astonishing that are more than 10, that are nearly 20 member states which will take part very actively in this process. By involving different stakeholders on different levels, we want to promote a certain ownership that contributes to the success of our agenda process. The ERA pilot initiative is a lot of work and effort, but we hope to see fast and tangible results by the end of the year. We need a bottom-up strategy, and this will be as well an important aspect for the future of the SAT plan. We need a bottom-up strategy with a stakeholder-driven approach. Essential incentives will come up from industry, research, and civil society. This is the basis for a common strategic research and innovation agenda for Europe as a result of our agenda process, which will be agreed end of the year in December in Bonn. This is the planning. And most of all, I invite you all to take part in our agenda process via our upcoming online consultation, which will start in a few days. Then we will have workshops, and in the end, we will have the conference in Bonn. To all these events and all these possibilities, you are highly invited by us and not only by the German presidency, because this is a common approach of the tri-presidency of our Portuguese and Slovenian partners. We believe, and these are my last remarks, we believe that this also works for the set plan or the co-fund. And together with the Commission and Member States, we can revitalize the set plan and also rely on the agenda process regarding green hydrogen. From my point of view, we should aim for a broad community-driven approach. Why not ask the stakeholders directly to give non-binding recommendations for R&I priorities? Within the set plan, we could set up a pan-European dialogue with research, industry, civil society, and policymakers, just as we do in our agenda process for green hydrogen. And I'm sure we would get much better results and a lot quicker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wilfried, and some good ideas there for the way ahead. We're running out of time, as I say, but I do want to get a quick comment also from Valérie Naki. Valérie, Wilfried's talked a lot about breaking silos, about involving stakeholders across the whole sector. And what I would just perhaps suggest to you is that the hydrogen sector in Europe has been extremely successful in building a very strong and influential community. But now, as it sort of, we find hydrogen relevant in many other areas in our strategy on clean aviation, on the heavy, hard-to-abate industries that Wilfried mentioned earlier. I mean, do you see opportunities to extend the reach of the hydrogen community and to sort of contribute in a revised future of the set plan to breaking down some of these silos?
Okay, that's many questions, Patrick, but you mentioned one which is key. It's avoiding the pitfall of working in silos, and that's exactly what we do within the Clean Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, because it's in our DNA, avoiding working in silos. And what is even more important in Horizon Europe is to implement this synchronization with others PPP, because you mentioned a few of them, but many of them will deal with hydrogen. So we need to make sure that it's well interconnected, there's no redundancy, and that together we can even more accelerate. We trying to do so within the Clean Joint Undertaking by having our multi-annual work plan, which addresses exactly that, and which consult other stakeholders as well and develop joint roadmap. And we are in the process of preparing memorandum of understanding with many of them in order to set in model the collaboration between the different EPPP and co-PPP. And the European Commission plays a fundamental role to ensure what I call frictionless synchronization. And the private stakeholders are also here to support and further facilitate this collaboration. But that's a joke that needs to be addressed by everyone, not only the European Commission, but every stakeholder around the table. I will also want to illustrate that with the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, because since the beginning, the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance has avoided working in silos as well by building 6 roundtables that represent the different activities of the hydrogen value chain, which gather different stakeholders, institutions, commissioners, ministers, associations, NGOs, industries. So it ensures the cross-cutting dimension and the approach of the work altogether for 2 main deliverables: pipeline to scale up investment project until 2030 in order to reach the target, and then to identify the barriers report of a different roundtable and the different milestone of a value chain. And this alliance is addressing it in 2 different ways: smooth and regular coordination between the facilitating organization of a roundtable. It's not just Hydrogen Europe, where you have moderator, Wind Europe, Solar Power Europe, ACEA, and I'm forgetting others, but all of them have a role to play. And it's done also with the European Commission in very strict coordination. And it has been very impactful because that allows us to identify project type, which were included and allow a call for project, which was the base of the European Hydrogen Week 2 weeks ago. Great. And the second thing is that we are supporting integration of the Alliance project via the matchmaking process put into place by the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Valérie. I mean, clearly you have a lot to say on this topic, and we've been very grateful for your many inputs today. Unfortunately, we won't have time. I was going to give Naki the chance to sort of capture the last essence of this discussion, but I think we're going to have to look forward to the report of the group of chief scientific advisors, where we will discover your wisdom in its full richness in a few days' time. So very happy to see that. So it remains for me to thank you all for this contribution, your contribution to this debate. Thank you for people who are watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.